Chapter 7 Friday, April 5th, 2013. The tactics we employed that week to accomplish our goal of managing Jenny until the time of the neurologist appointment sounds so odd now. It feels as if we were the worst and most naive parents of all time, believing if we rode out the storm until we got to that appointment, a simple explanation or a miracle cure would be unveiled. In what seems like a silly defense now, I know my error was a blind faith placed in the earlier diagnosis, combined with the belief that a specialist such as a neurologist would have the answers. Jenny's behavior was not improving in any way. In fact, it grew steadily worse. Although I remained convinced the symptoms were becoming more inconsistent with those attributable to adjusting to medication. The fact that there was no signs of additional seizures was good. The plan laid out on Thursday evening was for me to stay up with Jenny through the night and then go to work the next morning, and Barb would take over supervising Jenny. We had no way of knowing then, but this type of rotation would become our normal in the coming days and weeks. Jenny's periods of odd behavior had ebbs and flows. They would arise slowly, peak, and then go away for a while. The duration of these cycles varied, and it was quickly evident that they were unpredictable. On Thursday night, and moving into the early hours of Friday morning, Jenny had wound up for a particularly long time. The topics of conversation were more random than they had been previously, and were switching from topic to topic even more rapidly. By 2:30 a.m., my estimation is that Jenny had slept for a total of 5 or 6 hours since Tuesday morning. The sleep took place in short, restless spurts. She was clearly tired, as were John, Barb, and I. My shift of monitoring Jenny this night actually consisted of me almost constantly begging her to lie still for just 5 minutes. It was a grown-up version of being in the car with her as a 5-year-old, and playing the game of seeing if she could go 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes without saying a word. My theory was that because she was so tired, I hoped I could get her to agree to sit still long enough so that she might automatically fall asleep. She also had a completely selfish motivation. God, how I wanted to sleep. She was lying on the couch in our family room, and I was sitting in the recliner next to her. When I would ask her to lay still for 5 minutes, hoping she would fall asleep, the challenge was for me to sit still for 5 minutes and not distract her while still managing to stay awake myself. The strategy was failing miserably. While I was struggling to stay awake, Jenny was not able to be still long enough to fall asleep. Her thoughts were coming faster and becoming more random than ever. I resorted to having the TV on while the rest of the house was dark and quiet, hoping this would at least keep her from wandering around and remaining, at the very least, lying on the couch. This plan didn't work either. Instead, Jenny was on a rant as she tried to explain what the Keppra was doing to her brain. It was one of those moments she believed she had figured it out. In reality, she was making a long leap from a conversation she had overheard Barb and I having earlier in the evening. She would not make eye contact during these rants, but looked off somewhere, usually at the ceiling, just letting the thoughts in her mind flow out of her mouth. At one point during the night, as Jenny continued to discuss the Keppra, she suddenly turned, looked at me, and said, "Mark Rosen sucks." Then, just as suddenly, she went back to lying on the couch, looking straight up at the ceiling, and continued her analysis of Keppra and how the chemical breakdowns work on the inner structure of the brain, something she had no such knowledge of. For the record, no one in our family, including Jenny, has any issues with Mark Rosen. None of us, to my knowledge, have ever even met him. Our only connection with him is watching his reports as the lead sports anchor on a local television station. Regardless, during the course of the night, Jenny would very randomly, yet very sincerely, turn to me 4 or 5 times and say, with complete conviction, "Mark Rosen sucks." I can't say Jenny never criticizes people, but for her to say something potentially hurtful about anyone, and so blatantly, is rare. On occasion she will openly express a negative thought about someone, but she never does so as definitively and repeatedly as she did this night. and especially about someone she does not even know. Clearly, not only were her thoughts rapid and random, but an odd change in her personality was showing itself as well. Another new dimension to Jenny's situation revealed itself late during that long night with her. Jenny and I are both huge Minnesota Twins baseball fans. I had missed the game played earlier that afternoon and had turned on the late night rebroadcast of the game on TV. As Jenny watched the game during her rants, she began repeating the comment, "Time is getting stuck." While this was similar to some of her other meaningless babble, she was looking intently at the TV as she said it, and seemed to repeat it more than any other statement, enough so that it got my attention. I asked Jenny what she meant by the statement, "Time is getting stuck." I wanted to know what she was seeing on the TV to cause her to make this statement. Although trying to comprehend most of what she had said over the past few days had been a very frustrating proposition, I prepared myself for the difficult task of trying to figure out exactly what she meant. As she repeatedly tried to explain it to me, what I came to believe was that the video she was seeing of the game did not match the audio of what the broadcasters were saying. It took about 30 minutes for me to understand that in her mind what the broadcasters were saying was happening in the game, but the video would get stuck. This wasn't any kind of technical malfunction, as I could see that everything was fine on the TV. However, for Jenny, time was getting stuck because she could not hear the broadcasters talking about the action, but the video was not keeping up. We watched this game together. She pointed out that the announcer said the batter hit a single, but she insisted he never left the batter's box. I could see that the video was not actually freezing. Play had continued, but somehow in Jenny's mind it was not at the same pace as the announcers were speaking. After giving Jenny's statements quite a bit of thought, my assessment was that due to her hyperactivity and the rapid progression of thoughts going on in her head, she was simply losing focus on the game. She would process other thoughts in her mind and would return her attention to the game, expecting it to be exactly where she left off, and would not see what she expected the action to be. Her mind processed the discrepancy as time getting stuck in order to make sense of it. For example, she would hear that a batter got hit by a pitch, but by the time her rapid series of thoughts got around to processing that specific piece of information, and she looked at the screen, the next batter would already be up to bat. As a result, she would not see what she expected to see, which was a batter trotting to first base. She believed it was still the same batter standing in the box. I have no clue if my assessment is accurate or not, as of yet, I have no idea that this is what our world would be like for the next month and beyond. Although I was perplexed about everything going on and my lack of clarity as to the reason for it, the time getting stuck exchange gave me the idea to grab my digital voice recorder. My intention was to create a record of Jenny's speech and thought patterns for the doctor we would see later that day. Part of the difficulty we were having explaining the behavior to others was due to Jenny's ability to return to somewhat normal when people other than John Barb or I were around. The challenge became to provide evidence of the behavior strangers were not seeing when they were present. I needed a way to give doctors definite proof of the changes in Jenny's behavior. Although this would not allow them to see anything, at least they could hear it. I ended up recording Jenny's ramblings for the next 45 minutes. At 5 a.m. that morning, Jenny picked up her journal and started again. 5 o'clock. I discovered the loop I am stuck in. My body reset. Magical school bus. Does John know? What all does he know? I know I am at a kids lead at Barnes & Noble. Do I hold a manager possession as well? I didn't really sleep. Dad and I had a great convo last night. Where is the remote to change the channel? 5:38. I keep creating new loops. Wake up confused. Read my journal and it all makes sense. 5:41. Morning movie review. Evil Dead. At 5:43 and at 6:46 546, Jenny made entries very similar to that of 541, when she began to write exactly what she was hearing on TV. Then she made the following entry with no time notation. My loop is repeating over and over. Jenny continued to record nearly everything she heard and saw on the TV for 6 more pages with 33 entries between 5:49 and 6:17 a.m. Sometimes there were multiple entries within a single minute, and she recorded the same time with each entry. Her entries were so detailed as to what she heard spoken on the television. She had even listed the admission charge for a Minnesota United FC soccer game. The exception to this was an entry that, again, had no notation, but is shown between 5:55 and 5:56 a.m. entry. 5:55, Shakira on The Voice, Love Blake. The clock seems to not be moving at all, but so much is happening. 5:56, WCCO radio, tune in to listen. At 6:17 a.m., things get even more confusing for Jenny. 6:17, 7-day forecast. Construction, 94 by Clearwater St. Cloud. 6:19, last remember, NFL requirement teams for cameras. Sleep Express commercial. Bunch of scribbling. 6:09 is the time gap. 6:53 commercial break. It is difficult to see all that she crossed out, and various and inconsistent times had been written, but all of the journal entries deal with lack of sleep. Then she jumps from 6:19 back to 6:09 and makes a notation of a time gap. I'm not aware of or do not recall exactly what she was doing or experiencing from 9:19 to 6:53 a.m. This continued almost non-stop until 7:18 a.m. when she stopped to get ready to go to work with Barb, so that later that afternoon they could leave for the neurologist appointment directly from there, rather than needing to come back home to pick up Jenny for the appointment. This plan allowed Barb to get to work for at least a while. Barb and Jenny left for work about 7:30 a.m. as planned. The initial review of the journal entries from Thursday night to Friday morning seemed to reveal a rather chaotic thought process, or at least confusion, and the entries appear to be random. However, upon closer examination, the entries would be interpreted as simply a deliberate attempt to grasp what was going on around her, rather to decipher the difference between what she was thinking in her mind as opposed to what she was hearing on the television. It was almost as if Jenny understood that she was not able to tell the difference. In fact, an entry that Jenny made later that morning while at Barb's office shows her continued confusion. 8:30, at Mom's work. I'm confused and it doesn't make sense. I feel on info overload. 8:45, started crying because Mom was trying to get off work. Another view is that it may not have been so much about what she wrote, as it was the frequency of entries. As Jenny's illness progressed, she would demonstrate a tendency to get fixated on random things, but it would be another 2 weeks before this would be clear to any of us. In this case, it was a fixation on recording nearly every single thought that crossed her mind. The experience with the Schwann's delivery man the night before had given me serious doubts about waiting for the neurology appointment, but the night-long rants had convinced me that, at the very least, I had to call and consult with a doctor. The only question I had was which doctor. I knew contacting the neurologist would be difficult at best, and I didn't want to call a general nurse's line, as I was too tired to even think about trying to explain all of this over the phone to somebody who was new to the situation. I decided to wait until 8 a.m. when the office of Jenny's primary care doctor opened, which would allow me to talk directly to the nurse that saw Jenny on Monday. I knew that speaking to someone who had seen her earlier in the week would not make it any easier to explain the current situation, but at least I knew the person on the other end of the phone would know some of the history of what was going on, and perhaps understand that my concerns were real. I began preparing myself for work, intending to get to my office for a few hours before the neurologist appointment. I had